Tonight we are talking about inspection. So I'm Shannon. I'm the operations manager with Best Choice. I've got Candace here tonight as well. And it's funny. I feel like there are more inspections now than there were certainly a year ago. It's some of the forms changes that have happened here in Washington. We're now starting to feel it a little bit more. Some of those changes that happened a year ago. So we're not going to go over changes. I think we've all kind of had our fill of changes, I think, for the last several months. So we're going to go into some scenarios, and I actually have some real world experience situations I wanted to share with you guys tonight. One representing buyer, one representing seller. So you can kind of see it from both perspectives of what we are dealing with right now. So I suppose just to kind of kick us off, this is a funny photo. I did an inspection. You guys know I don't go out and play very often, but this is a buyer, a good friend of mine. She is an engineer, and we did an inspection. This crawl space was the smallest crawl space access I've ever seen. I think it was probably like 18 inches wide and not even a foot deep. This poor inspector was like, I don't even know how I'm going to get in. We do inspections for a reason, but I mean, this is basically part of the reason why. We want to know what's going on in the crawl. We want to know what's going in the attic. One of the biggest things that you can do as a buyer's agent and a seller's agent, this is why you do inspections. So you can go into those creepy crawly areas that not everybody wants to go into. I know for me, I am certainly claustrophobic and I do not want to be going in the crawl space, but this is why we hire inspectors to do some of those things and find some of those issues that may or may not be on the property. So kind of a funny story, I suppose, on this one. I took a picture of it because I just was like, oh gosh, this is going in the history books, I suppose, on this one, just how small this particular access was. So we'll just kind of start there. In terms of forms, so we're not going to go into detail the forms tonight, but I think it's worth mentioning right now because people are negotiating. Everything is negotiable, I think, right now, and it's very, very tight. We had one of our agents, it was a gap of $12,000 for first-time home buyers. All of them are first-time home buyers. The other one was a VA buyer. So all very, very close. And it came down to not just price, but price obviously was going to be a big bearing. But when you're that close, terms can make a big, big difference. So I know this particular property that I have on this screen, as a listing agent, one of the biggest things that I look at, certainly if I'm comparing two offers that are virtually identical, and one has 5 days, say, on their inspection versus 3 days, what else am I looking at, I suppose, on the 35? And I know for me, when I look at them as a seller representing the seller, I'm looking at that term 3 buyer's notice. They've got a 5-day inspection on this one. But you can't forget that additional time for inspections. That additional time on term 5 can add 3 additional days on their inspection. So what could be a 5-day is not really actually 5 days when you really kind of get down to it. It can very easily become 8 days. So especially when you're dealing with computation of time and business days and things like that, this can take actually a lot longer than what you're thinking. So if you're representing the seller, see if you can tighten some terms down when you're representing the seller. As a buyer's agent, leverage some of these timelines. If you know your inspector can get out within a day or two, I mean, gosh, tighten it up. Why not? See if we can wrap it up with a 2 or 3 day inspection. Sometimes that can be a big deal. Some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about a little bit more tonight is really these requests for repairs or modifications. So really when a buyer has done their inspection, they find stuff, they always do, right? I've never seen an inspection report, and I think I would be hard pressed, even on new construction, to find anything that did not have anything pop up on an inspection report. There's always going to be something, and that provides an opportunity for the buyer to negotiate with the seller on repairs or any sort of modification to the purchase and sale contract. So that's what we're going to spend the rest of the half hour here with you guys on, so that you guys can see some scenarios here. So let's get right into it. So for those that have never done an inspection before, this is kind of a sample of what you would see. This is actually a fairly good report, I would say. I've seen some that are really, really bad with lots and lots of things. This one was actually not too bad, but it has safety hazards, recommendations, maintenance items. Some inspectors have different software and things that they'll share inspections and things like that with, but this is pretty typical of what you would see in terms of formatting. Now, to be careful though, in Washington, we can't supply this to the seller. If we were to do that without any sort of authorization from the seller on a 35C, we in essence could be waiving our inspection. So we have to be very careful about how we structure and present our list of requests to the seller. If I was to pop on this information right here as it's written from the inspection, gosh, if I was a seller, I'd be like, what am I getting myself into here? We've got a bird's nest in the attic. We've got some insulation. We've got rodents. Like, what do you want? What do you want me to do as the seller? So we'll kind of give you some tips and tricks here as we kind of go along, but this is an example of what you would see after an inspection. The buyer is going to be reviewing this. They have time to review this. At least they should have time to review this before you prepare that response back to the seller on the 35R. So this is a sample. So on the top, you'll see the capture of the actual form section of the 35R. And then below is a sample of something I used recently with a buyer of how I can communicate that mumbo jumbo stuff on the top that they may not necessarily know or have done before. This particular buyer was a first-time home buyer. She's an engineer, so she's very detailed, but she's like, I trust you, tell me what I need to do. And so this was a response. So for those of you that are on your phone, I'll just read it to you. It says, I know you're at work. I just tried calling you. You have several options at this point. Number one, we cut our losses and look for another house, which we can certainly do. And option two, we accept and move forward. No asking for no repairs in essence. Option three, we ask for a concession from seller, money or repair. I would be surprised if they budge more than $5K. I've kind of already prepped this particular buyer because they were getting such a good deal on the price. We ask for more, and option four would be we ask for more time for contractors to come out and evaluate. An additional 5 days on top of what we have already. Afterwards, we have the above options to choose from. That goes into that asking for additional time. If I was playing this as a buyer's agent and I'm like, ooh, I've got this type of repair, or maybe we need some more time to think about it. Gosh, I mean, I could go from a 3-day inspection to an 8-day inspection very quickly at this point if they chose option four. But kind of explaining those options and telling her exactly when she needs to respond. I ended by saying, I'm here to help along the way with whatever you decide. I'll plan to call you tonight if I don't hear from you sooner. She's an engineer. She's working during the day. So there's specific times that I had to call her. A lot of the communication I did with her was actually over the phone. The written is just I could reference it with her while I was on the phone with her. So I suppose my tip from you is just make sure when you're working with buyers that you're outlining their options. They need to know that they have options. They don't want to feel like they're railroaded into, just wave. That's not what you should be saying or doing to represent their best interests. So outline their options, be pretty fair and just upfront about it. But then also remind them of how much time. So typically when I'm working with a buyer, I'll say, okay, so I know the timelines end at 9. It does take me some time to prepare the paperwork and get your signatures and all that stuff. So I need to have, I need to know what you guys want to do by 5, 6, 7, however long you think it will take for you to prepare things by that deadline, if not sooner, right? And when it comes to sellers, I mean, it's fairly similar, I would say, just on the other side of the vein. I have another sample here on the screen. This is where we're representing a seller. This particular seller had a foundation crack in the garage that was somewhat substantial. The buyer had supplied, they had done additional time or had done something of that nature to know that, okay, this is going to be a substantial repair. What do we want to do? And so this particular request was sent over 35R with an attachment with a bunch of different things, right? And so as representing the seller, I sent her the 35R and I said, see below and attached. Buyers responded asking for some concessions. I outlined what those concessions are: a reduction of $13,000, a $410 home warranty, and the already planned sewer replacement. This property was in the city of Tacoma and had a concrete sewer line. So we're looking at a repair on that particular item. They didn't mention the foundation issue, now did they? So I said, you have a couple of options. Option A, agree to the terms proposed by the buyer. Option B, reject the buyer's proposal entirely. We could very well lose this buyer, go back on the market and get another buyer. However, that buyer will find the same serious foundation issue, and we most likely will be in the same situation again. Most buyers are very concerned about foundation issues like this. I think right now, in the way that the market is right now, they're doing inspections. They're all doing inspections. So, if one person finds a roof issue that needs to be replaced within the next year, another buyer is going to find the same thing. Don't kid yourself, I think, on situations like that. So let's work together. I think the key on the way the inspections are running right now is we need to work together. How can we problem solve? How can we work together and find some sort of solution where buyer wants to buy, seller wants to sell, but we have some sort of gap, whatever that gap may be. And then again, I'll plan on talking to you this afternoon to go over your options in detail. We have until Tuesday, again, reminding them of the timelines to inform the buyer of whatever they decide to do. So, it's same thing. It's just obviously a little bit different when you're working with the seller. These two samples that I've shown you have worked very, very well. And both of these have come to some sort of middle ground. It's not like one all the way or one seller benefited, buyer benefit. It was a very, let's find a common ground, middle ground. This is what we don't want to see. So this is one I was representing the seller. This is recently, I just got this not even 30 days ago for a property, and bless his heart, this cute agent is new to the business and had not been properly trained. Now, we train our agents that when you're preparing an inspection response, this is not necessarily what we would like to see. This to me, it could be construed of two different things. One, this is a laundry list of things that were either already disclosed on a Form 17 or are tidy items that are not necessarily something that's suitable for 35R. The other kind of consideration that some people may have is that he's copying and pasting from an inspection report, which can kind of get in some hazy water when you're talking about whether or not they've waived their inspection by providing pieces of the report. So be careful on this. This particular situation, I'll kind of show you the resolution. I think I've got a visual on what it looked like, but in essence, we have to find some sort of middle ground. In this particular situation, this was the response. I think the commonality I think that they ended up agreeing on was a mixture of repair, confirmation, and then also concessions in some respect. The seller I know was willing to actually give a little bit more than I was expecting right now because they didn't want to go back on market. They didn't want to wait another 2-3 weeks with another buyer and then an additional 30 days for escrow. So just be upfront, be candid, because you'd be surprised what the sellers are willing to do right now, the way that the market is. So this is a good sample. I suppose this is kind of what we would like to see in a perfect world. On the left, you'll see, and I'll read it to you, the email that kind of came along with this, but this is a sample of, what we can do. How can we find these commonalities? This particular inspection report had a laundry list. They all do have some sort of laundry list of things that come up on a property. And so this was the email. I'll read it to you for those that are just listening or driving or whatnot, but it says, thanks for your quick action the other day. We were able to get into the crawl space today by some miracle. This is that small picture I showed you guys earlier. It was a very tight entrance for the inspector with the way the pipes are located. My buyers want to make this work and they're willing to take on the work needed in the crawl after closing. I think we found a good middle ground on the 35. If you need copies of what we found when you talk to the seller, I'm happy to provide them. That would be on a Form 35C. If they needed that, you would need that signed by the seller. It says the report also noted that there wasn't CO detectors, but I'm sure there must be. Let me know if you want me to swing by the house before appraisal. I'm happy to help with this. You're welcome to call me anytime this weekend and we can discuss. I think what you'll notice is on the 35R, I could have put that on the 35R asking for the CO detectors. When you've done this enough, you'll know that the appraisers also will ask for that. So it's almost like just instead of nitpicking about little things like that, just giving the seller an opportunity just to get ahead of it before the appraisal, which is really when that CO detector is going to be called out. But the response on this was a combination. Seller to please. I know Rochelle's a big fan of having to have to please. It's a very kind way to kind of approach things. But then you'll also notice this is not a laundry list of 30 different things: caulking, broken seals, nest and the crawl space needs to be removed, leaks in this, and the roof needs to be patched. It's not a laundry list of things. Instead, it's the top 3 items that are most important to that buyer. What is going to make them walk away? What would cause them alarm? What is something any other buyer would be concerned with? Those are the things that, I typically advise the buyer to think about before we prepare this very clearly. So this particular buyer, they were concerned about leaks. They're like, we'll deal with the roof. We'll deal with the attic. We'll deal with this weird wasp nest that was in the attic and the nest and all these other things that we're dealing with rodents. But they didn't want to deal with the leaks. So it's not something that they felt comfortable with. So I said, okay, well, let's see what the seller's willing to do. Seller to please have a contractor remedy the leak around the distribution line of the kitchen sink, the primary bathroom, replace the kitchen and bathroom outlets with GFCI receptacles. And then number 3, credit to buyer of $5,000. So it's a mixture of repairs and money, but fairly simple requests. The only thing as a buyer that we could have done better to better protect them would have been to have a licensed, bonded, and assured contractor. That's the only thing that I may have changed. And then also to ask for receipts. Sometimes, depending on the circumstances, in this particular instance, I wasn't too worried because the way the listing agent had conducted her business, I wasn't too concerned. But those are the things that you consider to kind of better protect your buyers even.
Right.
Is there anything you would have done differently too, Candace?
No, I love it. It's nice, clean, straight to the point. And even your email that you put together, kind of just like, it's almost like you're sliding that in to a home run, literally.
Yeah, it's assumptive too. It's like, let's keep it together. We don't need to be nickeling and diming each other. This is a very fair response.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Guy has stated too the $5,000, sometimes having that on the 34 separately is ideal too. Listed on a form 34 so that it can go out to the lender as well.
Yep. And guys kind of get into the pro version of that.
Yeah.
Typically in those situations when you're having the negotiation with credits on the form 35R, usually what you'll see is there's clarification addendums done on a form 34, just like Guy is explaining, where it says for clarification purposes, especially right now when you've got maybe the seller giving credits on a 22A financing addendum for closing costs. And then you also have credits on inspection. Well, what is it? Are we going from 10,000 to 15,000? Are we going from 10,000 to 5,000? Like what is the total number of credits? So you'll usually see some sort of clarification. For clarification purposes, total seller credits shall be is usually what you'll see on that form 34. Good point, Guy. Love it. I think it's worth mentioning. So if the buyer is like wanting to walk, what forms we use, we were just talking about this today. You use the same 35R and it has an option, I believe it's option 2, where it says buyer hereby terminates the contract and requests their earnest money to be returned to them. Just add a form 50 as well. Escrow will probably ask for it as well. If they're a good escrow company, they will. But just supply that with it while you're getting the buyer's signature. It gives escrow instructions on how to disperse the earnest money. So that way there's no question. It's like buyer's getting their earnest money back. They didn't come to terms. So that's how you get out of the contract. If you start getting into the third section and then you're on to another addendum at that point in time, you'll want to call the office, any one of us, and we can kind of help you at that point in time and how we can best negotiate that inspection response. But try and keep it on that 35R as much as you can. I've got two tips, I suppose, two things. So when you're representing the seller, these are kind of the top tips, I suppose, and it's worth remembering too. You have to kind of put yourself when you're saying, okay, we're trying to find middle ground. The sellers tend to prefer to do a credit. They don't really want to be doing repairs when they're trying to already arrange for moving plans. Buyers typically will prefer to want the repairs rather than monetary, type of concessions. So kind of put yourself in that type of shoe. That's why having some sort of mixture is a good idea. Instead of having a plumber, an electrician, and a contractor all go out to house, it's like, okay, well, let's pick the plumber and then maybe ask for credit for the electrical work or some combination thereof. Try and keep it simple for sellers when they're dealing with moving plans. But with sellers, these are kind of the things to keep in mind. When I'm working with a seller, you have to remember timelines end at 9 p.m. has to be delivered, emailed out, done before 9. Otherwise, you might be in trouble. But then also, some of the stuff you can get ahead of when you're preparing the listing for the property. That particular situation I explained earlier, it didn't have CO detectors. That's something that will get called out on appraisal. So I always typically will check during the listing appointment. Do they have the carbon monoxide detectors? Do they have the smoke detectors? Usually, sometimes they're even in a combo. And then the water straps. These are things that have been called out for years at this point, but there's still houses that for some reason just don't have them. So just double check on those. And then access to a crawl space, attic, electrical panel, water heater, and furnace. Sometimes we're having more properties that are occupied right now. I think, Candace, you would echo that, right?
Oh
There's
yeah.
more occupied properties. And so what ends up happening is a lot of the sellers' personal effects are stored in their garage. Which is great because it gets them out of the house and makes it look good for photos. But it does make it challenging when you're having inspections, you're having appraisal, and the appraiser and the inspector need access to some of those different things. So I typically will tell sellers, I need a pathway. Just make sure I've got a pathway so I can get to those different items. Sometimes the crawl space is in closets. Make sure the closets are, emptied where that crawl space hatch is, so that way people can get access. So just remember, don't forget, that's kind of one of the things that always will crop up. Common call outs. If you're wanting to kind of prep and get ahead of some stuff, Candace, I'm sure you can kind of pipe in on this one too. I see GFCI stuff all the time. Furnaces being serviced. I get broken seals usually for windows. That's mainly cosmetic type of things. What else are you seeing typically?
Um, let's see here. I mean, actually, most recently seeing quite a few items, the repairs for the trim, leaks, plumbing leaks, stuff like that, seeing a lot of that, common call outs. And sometimes these are simple things that you might have done a walkthrough with your seller to, and notice, like, you know what, this is leaking,
Yeah.
and pre-prep for those home warranties, I
Yeah.
think, leverage them. But I think it's like plumbing leaks and then rotted trim. Um, those are the top
Yeah,
things.
it's the fascia and whatnot too.
Mhm.
I know it doesn't crop up all the time, but it's one of those big things to get ahead of too. It's septic and oil tanks. If you have those on the property, just get a head start on them. It's best to. During COVID, we were having so many delays with septic pumping and recording in certain counties. So just get ahead of it, and try and get them pumped and inspected early. And if you know that there's an oil tank, if you've got a property that's older, like 1950s or older, just look for a furnace. You'll know it when you see it. It's this big tank that's an oil tank, and they'll crop up every now and then, and they need to be properly decommissioned. So just be careful on those ones. But Candace is right. Leverage the home warranties. Home warranty companies offer seller warranties for the seller. So we had a situation where the furnace was working, but then after inspection, we found out, oh no, like it stopped working, like during the course of when we listed it and when the buyer did their inspection. So we're able to leverage the home warranty with very little hassle. And they were able to, I think they ended up doing a replacement of actually the water heater too. So it pays to get that stuff in order, get the seller warranty. It pays for itself in many cases, at least for that peace of mind, while you're on the market. And I think I have that buyer credit clarified too. So that's also to protect your seller. We don't want that 35R floating around with underwriters and things like that. It's best just to keep the credit separate from inspection responses so that they don't need to see that. For buyer's agents, so again, timelines still end at 9 o'clock. This is the term that you're going to get used to saying over and over and over again. Seller to please, and then you list them out. 1, 2, 3. Try and keep it simple. Use the word remedy instead of fix. My fix might be different than Candace's fix. So, let's remedy the leak in the bathroom rather than fix the leak. Well, I may not have properly done it if it was just a quick fix versus done it properly. So just remedy the situations rather than fixing a repair. And then focusing on the make or break items instead of that laundry list of things that agent showed that I had on the screen of like 30 bajillion different things to ask the seller to fix before they closed on the house. Focus on the things that they're willing to walk away from. What are the health and safety things? What's going to cause them to walk away from the deal? What is any other buyer going to be scared by or concerned with? Those types of things. Asking for receipts. If the seller has been asked to do certain things by a contractor, I certainly would want to have that for my records and also verify that it was done. And then, again, so that clarification, it's going to be preferred to have a licensed, bonded, and insured contractor do certain things. So when it's appropriate, use that terminology in that order: licensed, bonded, and insured, plumber, electrician, general contractor, whatever it is. So that way you are protecting your buyer in that way. I think that's everything I think I had on the tips. Candace, is there anything I missed maybe?
Yeah, I think you did say it, but also to on the inspection, ask them to provide receipts of items that had been repaired prior to closing.
Yeah.
So that you have that and you can provide that too. And I think it's fine to write that on the actual inspection response.
Yeah, it is. And I think too, remember, as buyer's agents, we've gotten out of practice because a lot of us haven't done inspections in the last couple of years, and now that's like all we're doing now. But you're entitled to a final walkthrough. Please take advantage of the final walkthrough. It solves so many issues by just doing that. We can have a whole training on why and what to do and the purpose of the final walkthrough, but by and far, it's to verify a couple different things: that the repairs were done.
Right.
The work orders actually reflected the repair that was done, and it was done properly. It gives the opportunity for you to re-inspect if there were certain things that the inspector called out. We can have that same inspector go out and just verify that it's been fixed. There may be extra costs for that, but that's an opportunity for you to take advantage of that, and also just to verify the sellers in the process of moving out. That's
Right.
kind of another reason to do those final.
Right. Make sure that they're on their way out. And also too, I always on the final walkthrough, I just go through and make sure that the major systems are still working. So, utilities on and the major systems are working. Your stove, your refrigerator, open the fridge, make sure it's on and working. And those things that are to be left there are there and are actually there and working.
Yeah.
Right. It's definitely not a time to come back in and start wanting repairs for things like now the pictures are off the wall and you want, them to fill the holes of pictures. It's not for that purpose, but definitely to, just validate that the items that are supposed to be there are there and that they are still working.
Yep. And I got a question: is it prudent to request receipts 3 days prior to close, walk through after that? Yeah, I mean, most of the time we'll see, receipts to be provided. Usually I think I do 5 days. 5 days prior to closing is what I'll usually say. And that way it gives us time to review things before CDs and signings and things like that too.
Yeah. Guy mentions sometimes it is there's a limit to credit amount given to buyers and closing costs. And I've had quite a few conversations literally this weekend in reference to basically, we're under contract and we've got 15,000 in closing costs right now. Right now we've come to the inspection. Do we have enough room for another 10,000? Do we have enough room to use that for a rate buy down? Those sort of things. And that's where you want to really stay in communication with the lender and make sure, see where you're at with these items too. So before you go asking for like another $15,000 to $20,000 and you've already receiving 15 maybe off the top, beware, be in touch with your lender, make sure that there's room for that and there's nothing left on the table. Because if there is, I've seen situations where we've had to like make arrangements to offer up more money for like a home warranty, like beef up a home warranty. Too much money in closing costs has nowhere to go. So be aware with that, stay in communication with your lender, especially when you're negotiating some of these extra costs.
Yeah. And I think too, it's, there's a lot of, over the last year, there's a lot of people talking about rate buy downs and things like that. Our rates are, Grace kind of gave us an idea of where they're at right now. Sellers are, in some cases, they're willing to do it. The one instance I showed you where it had a laundry list of things, we ended up coming to terms and tighten that thing down where it was a very reasonable 35R. We got there. But that particular seller, that house had been on the market for almost 2.5 weeks. he had been primed. As a seller, one of the best things you can do is prime them for a price reduction. And the way that you do that is say, after this amount of time, after this many weeks, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to evaluate the market conditions, the market pricing to make sure we're not off. And sellers they understand it when you phrase it in that way. But some of them are willing to do a lot more than what you're thinking, because some of them have already prepped for a reduction in price. So if they're already prepped for their price reduction, sometimes they're willing to do a little bit more credits than what you're originally thinking when you're representing them. So,
Right.
And Rochelle has a comment, or lenders have a grid they use to determine if the buyer has max seller credits. If the buyer puts more down, then there really isn't a max. Yep. So be mindful, be in touch with the lender is the biggest advice. And some of those extra credits can be used for closing costs. They can also be used for buy downs, prepaids, all those different things too. So good question. Okay. I think that was all the questions I had. Candace, anything from you that you got?
No, that's all. I think this is great. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, hopefully this was helpful for you guys. Good luck out there this week. There's still a lot of business coming through. It's everything's on the table. Let's come together. Let's find some common ground. Let's work together, all the things, so that way we can come to some sort of resolution and get some of these properties moving. Days on market is increasing a little bit, but that's okay. We're just kind of having to do some more inspections and things like that too. Perfect. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Shannon, I have one question real quick.
Sure.
Can you just clarify? So if on the 35R, if we have a few repair requests, and then also seller credit requests, are you saying to write all the repair requests, but the seller credit to write it in a form 34?
Yeah, so typically what ends up happening is you're coming to terms on the 35R. And once you've kind of come to terms, then usually, it depends on which side you're representing, but I typically will be like, okay, now that we've come to terms on 35R and what we're doing, we're going to clarify that for the lender, because the lender, because the 35R is not a notice, it's not a 90 series, it's not a termination, it's not an addendum, it's not a purchase and sale agreement. They are not necessarily required to see a copy of the 35R. So I don't necessarily want underwriters seeing a copy of all the things that are wrong with the property. That's not something I necessarily want them to see. So usually if I've got I'm doing $5,000 in closing costs on the financing addendum, but then we're also giving an additional $5,000 because of the repairs on the inspection. If I was the lender or the underwriter, all I know about is the $5,000. So to let the lender know without giving them the 35R, I would prepare a 34 after the 35R is agreed to and say, for clarification purposes, total seller credits to buyer to be, and you put the $10,000 that they're paying to buyer.
Got it.
So hopefully that helps a little bit. And usually it ends up happening once you guys have agreed to terms.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, and I think, Alex, you got a question. You can call me if you've got the as-is type of language. We can talk through that individual circumstance. So perfect, you guys. Thanks so much. Good luck this week. Call us if you have any questions. Our numbers are here on the screen. You're welcome to call us, text us. I've got someone who Facebook messaged me every now and then. That works too. Just send it our way and we can help you. Alex, I'll send you a text message. So that way we can sync up too. Thanks, you guys. Have a great week.